The kettle was already black before I was born. Cast iron, wide as a washtub, hanging from a hook over the washhouse floor. I can still hear my mother's fat hitting it. A wet slap, then a slow hiss. Tallow rendering down doesn't smell the way you'd guess. Closer to a candle just blown out, and warm bread, and something underneath I never had a word for. 420 pounds. That was the hanging weight of the steer my father slaughtered every November. The one that fed 6 of us clear through to spring. I won't explain that number yet. Hold on to it. Stay with me to the end. I'll give you the exact ratio my grandmother used to render tallow so it kept, unrefrigerated, in a cellar for 11 months without turning. I've never seen it written down anywhere, and I'm only saying it once. I still wonder how many of you have stood in your own kitchen holding something you didn't know what to do with and thrown it out rather than admit that. I grew up outside Charm, Ohio, in Holmes County, in a house with no freezer, no refrigerator, and no line item for meat, because meat wasn't a line item. It was an animal we knew by sight, walking a field, and then it was ours. All 420 pounds of it for the year. What happened to that steer between November and the next October is most of what I'm telling you today, and it starts with the part nobody wants to hear. Tell me something in the comments first. Tell me the last cut of beef you actually bought, not the one you wanted, the boring Tuesday one. The kind that barely smells like anything by the time it hits a hot pan. I read every comment. Most of you are rotating the same 4 cuts and calling it a grocery bill. I did too, for over a year after I left, before I remembered what I already knew. A steer isn't 4 cuts. It's closer to 40. And the reason you've only ever met 4 of them is not an accident. Same aisle, same trays under plastic wrap, same sticker shock at the register. And somehow, you're still losing ground every month. Ground beef is up 12% over last year. Steak is up 17%. Underneath both numbers, the United States cattle herd is now the smallest it's been in 75 years. Not since 1951 has this little beef walked around on this much land. This is what the record shows, not what I remember, and not what somebody told me at a diner. The herd shrank, the price climbed, and the grocery store did what it always does when a resource gets scarce. It protected the cuts with the biggest margin and let the rest go quiet. There's no money in telling you a chuck roast, cooked low for 6 hours, turns out more tender than a strip steak cooked wrong in a hot pan for 4 minutes. So, nobody tells you. There's no line item for the smell of tallow rendering slow on a back burner, the whole house going warm and faintly smoky. But that smell used to mean the week's meat was already halfway handled. When was the last time you cooked something because it was the animal's turn to be used, not because a recipe told you to go buy it? I'll tell you what changed my mind in a minute, but first, it wasn't a lesson. It was a woman standing at a table with a knife, and I was young enough to still be underfoot. Her name was Miriam Yoder, though everyone on our road called her Aunt Miriam. And she was nobody's aunt that I ever worked out. That's just what you called a woman who'd outlived her own kitchen table twice over. She butchered for 3 families besides her own every fall into her 70s. I watched her break down a hindquarter in under 40 minutes with a knife worn to the shape of her hand alone. I drove out to that farm 4 years ago, long after I'd left, just to see if the smokehouse still stood. It did. Smaller than I remembered. Everything from childhood is. The wood inside was black and cured from decades of smoke, and when I pressed my hand flat against the boards, they were still faintly warm. Or maybe I only wanted them to be. There was a moment at Miriam's table, maybe 9 years old, when I honestly didn't know what I was looking at. She'd set something dark red and glistening on the board and called it the best part. Has anyone ever handed you something and asked you to trust it before you understood what it was? I didn't answer her either. She wasn't teasing me, though I assumed so at first, the way a child assumes an adult is joking when the truth sounds like one. Liver, heart, tongue, kidney. The parts a modern store prices at almost nothing, if it stocks them at all, with the parts she reached for first, not last. And here is where it gets interesting, because what Miriam did with that hindquarter wasn't folklore. It was math. Every ounce accounted for, nothing left for the compost but what truly couldn't be used. And I didn't understand the scale of it until I started keeping my own numbers, years later, in a kitchen of my own. It was never just eating the whole animal. It was a schedule. Week 1 belonged to what wouldn't keep: liver fried in butter, heart sliced thin and salted, kidney soaked in milk water 2 hours to pull the sharp edge off before it touched a pan. Chemists would call that soak an osmotic draw. My grandmother called it washing the wildness out. The better explanation. How much of what's in your own cabinets right now have you actually used this year? Almost nothing in that cellar sat unused for long. There wasn't room for anything that didn't earn its shelf. One November, the kidney soak sat too long, and my mother forgot the crock on the porch overnight. It froze solid. My father thawed it by the stove, grumbling, and it turned out better than fine. The cold finished what the milk water started. We never did it on purpose again. Some good things only happen once, by accident. The fat came next, rendered low, never past 250 degrees, or it scorches and carries a burnt taste into everything after. One steer at 420 pounds gave close to 30 pounds of clean tallow. Stored in stoneware in a cellar that never dipped below 30 degrees or climbed past 50, it kept us in cooking fat all year. No bottle, no jug, no store. The bones went into a pot that simmered, never boiled, for 18 to 30 hours, until the broth set up like jelly in a cold bowl. Cooks call that gelatin content. We called it broth with backbone. That black kettle from the wash house did the rendering every year of my childhood. And it's still hanging in the same spot, last I checked. Which tells you how little that farm has changed, and how much I have. Now, I want to be honest. I got plenty of this wrong myself. I rendered fat too hot the first 2 times on my own, and both batches carried a bitter edge I couldn't cook out. I threw away organ meat for almost a year because I'd absorbed the idea it was lesser, even though I'd eaten it first, not last, as a child. I oversalted broth trying to make it taste like something from a can, before remembering the point of bone broth is that it tastes like nothing but itself. And I bought a slow cooker before I owned a single stock pot, backwards, and money I didn't have. Here's the part I don't usually say out loud. The year after I left, I stood in a grocery store parking lot in Worcester with $9 in my coat pocket and cried. Not from hunger, but because I didn't know how to buy meat in a building holding more food than I'd ever seen assembled in one place. I felt more lost than I had leaving the community itself. Nobody puts that in the leaving the Amish stories. Sometimes it isn't the big things you grieve. It's not knowing which cut costs what, inside a system built to make you feel foolish for not already knowing. By the time it was all accounted for, Organs, fat, bones, the cuts you'd recognize and the ones you wouldn't. There was almost nothing left to throw away. Almost nothing. And that number is smaller than you think. If you're the kind of person who'd rather learn to make something last than learn to want something new, you already know what to do next. When did you last choose the slower, harder option on purpose? Just because it was better. Stay through the next part. It answers the question everyone eventually asks me. Here's something that has nothing to do with beef. Holmes County has more horse and buggy traffic than almost anywhere in the country, and the township still grades a narrow strip of gravel alongside the paved roads just for hooves. So you'd hear the difference. Soft clop instead of tires slapping asphalt. I think about that strip sometimes when people ask if we were behind the times. We weren't behind anything. We built for what we had, not what we wished we had. This is for a household with a working freezer, or a genuinely cold cellar, and one person willing to spend a weekend a year learning a knife properly. The kind of afternoon that leaves your hands aching and smelling like iron, no matter how many times you scrub them. It is not for someone in a 400 square foot apartment with no patience for a 30-hour pot of bones. Anyone who tells you this scales to one steak in a microwave is selling you something. I'm not. It isn't free the way people want it free. You're trading money for time, and time isn't sitting there for everyone working 2 jobs and raising kids alone. I won't pretend otherwise just to make a tidier video. Have you ever priced out what a weekend of your own time is worth, honestly, before calling a shortcut not worth taking? Most people never do that math. Neither did I for a long time. It didn't die out because it stopped working. It got priced out by convenience, by 2 incomes, by a system where the fast version is cheaper up front and the slow version only cheaper once you've paid to learn it. Nobody says that part out loud, which is exactly why I want to say the rest plainly, once. There's good money in selling a woman a thing she has to keep buying. There's no money in teaching her to make one animal, one pot of fat, last a year. Would you even recognize what enough looks like anymore? Or has somebody else been deciding that for you? Nobody can meet a tallow rendered on your own stove, in a pot still warm from your own cooking. That was never a secret. You just weren't in the room when they said it. No footnote, no fine print. This weekend, do one thing. Look through your trash or your compost after your next meal with meat in it, and notice what you threw away without a second thought, even the smell of it a day later before the bag goes to the curb. Come back and tell me what it was. Type the word nothing if you've ever finished a meal with nothing left over to throw away at all. So, the ratio I promised. Render the fat low and slow. Strain it twice through cheesecloth while still hot enough to pour clean. Pack it into stoneware or glass while still liquid enough to seal itself against the air as it cools. No lid needed if the seal forms right. Just cloth tied over the top against the dust. Kept somewhere that never warms past 50 degrees or drops below 30. That seal holds 11 months, sometimes longer. Now it's written down, once, here. And the 420 pounds was never just a number. It was one steer, one November, one family of 6, stretched by hand and by kettle, and by a woman named Miriam's knife, clear through to the next October, with almost nothing thrown away. That's the whole arithmetic behind every beef headline this year. It was never about the price of one steak. It was how many meals you can pull from one animal if nobody's taught you to stop at 4. I still don't have an answer for you about that thing in your own kitchen, the one you might have thrown away without a second thought. I won't pretend that I do. Not every question needs an answer. Sometimes it only needs to be honest. And that one's yours to sit with, not mine to close for you. That kettle is still hanging on its hook in the washhouse outside Charm, black as it ever was, waiting for November. Waste nothing. The people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just now remembering.